A silent and unnamed restaurant located in an ordinary street. The cursed thing sealed in the Steel City. Reverse the chaotic mysterious history of time and space starting from being able to see the ID and blood bar. Guillermo believed that his way of opening it was wrong. He was determined to return to the normal world and not be dragged down by his own imagination and hallucinations. However, the art style of the daily world continued to crumble day by day, and the crumbling daily life became more and more magnificent day by day. He found that the situation was slightly off. Keywords of the novel. When did the health bar in this world show no pop-ups? When did the health bar in this world show the full TXT collection download? And when did the health bar in this world show the latest chapter reading? Chapter 1. Preface issues may be quite complex. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Preface issues may be quite complex. Mr. Gu, your question may be quite complex. The faint smell of disinfectant permeated the air. Sitting behind the desk, the doctor, wearing a white coat and slightly grayish-white temples, raised the film in his hand to study and said. Although wearing a mask and unable to see his expression clearly, it was evident that his eyebrows were slightly furrowed. As far as our examination is concerned, there are indeed no problems with your body, and it can even be said that you are very healthy. Generally, modern people have some sub-healthy states on you, and to be honest, this is really rare. The doctor looked at the young man sitting in front of his desk with a pensive expression on his face, a handsome and tall figure, and couldn't help but nod silently. The skin color is really good, and you can tell at a glance that it's a person with a regular routine, healthy diet, and very self-discipline. Unfortunately, despite being such a healthy young man, it seems that he is suffering from a strange illness. But unfortunately, nothing can be detected, and it is unclear whether this is really the case or if the other person's imagination may be caused by mental or psychological reasons. However, although we cannot detect any problems, Mr. Gu, you have unfortunately developed such symptoms, so we cannot be too certain. After all, we cannot rule out the possibility of limited conditions here. The doctor withdrew his gaze and also restrained his thoughts. He continued to look at the film in his hand, pondering seriously for a moment, but could only give a somewhat ambiguous statement due to excessive composure. If you're not too confident, we still suggest you go to other places for a few re-examinations. The doctor actually doesn't want to play football, mainly because he really can't make a conclusion because it's hard to say. Although from the examination results, it seems like this is the case, the opponent's body is really good and there are no problems. But it seems that the other party has really encountered some trouble. In such a situation, which doctor dares to guarantee it? Is there no problem with it all at once? It's still safer to provide the inspection results while mentioning that it's not possible to be absolutely certain, perhaps it's just that you don't have the conditions here to find out. To be honest, this multiple-choice question is quite easy. I understand, thank you, doctor. The young man across from him seemed to have anticipated this earlier. He nodded lightly and then stood up. 10 minutes later. Stepping out of the gate of the central hospital, Guillermo looked up at the sun in the sky, which had not yet generated much heat, and then habitually took 2 steps towards the shadow on the side. It is now midsummer, although it comes very early. The early morning sun rises, and the sunshine is so gentle that it seems to have no heat at all. The summer heat and waves are not outrageous to the extent that they do not speak of basic laws. For example, starting from early morning to bake the earth and turn the city into a high-temperature steamer. But this won't last too long, he has a lot of experience with it. Guillermo turned around and glanced at the bustling lobby of the hospital on the first floor, then let out a long sigh. He had listened carefully to the doctor's advice just now, which was indeed mature and steady, giving him a feeling of, listening to what you say is like listening to what you say. Simply put, if this kind of cliché is useful, it won't be useless at all. He is unlikely to come here again. Because this is already the 3rd hospital that has said so, the processes are all astonishingly similar, and Guillermo suspects that they may have colluded beforehand. Because it's always a complete check. Up and you tell him, the result is that your body is very healthy, theoretically there's no problem. However, he dared not guarantee anything, and could only politely suggest that he, if he is not at ease, can go to other places to check. From the beginning, we discovered the problem and went to a regular hospital for examination and diagnosis. However, the hospital was unable to determine what was going on, so we switched to a large hospital. As a result, we were unable to determine the problem and could only politely suggest going to another place to see. So now, at this time this morning, Guemo appeared here. The city he lives in is also considered a big city, and the level of the city's hospitals is self-evident. Even if they are not among the top tier, they are not at the level of second or third rate, and the result is that they cannot play a significant role. Even the most basic requirement is that it is impossible to check if there is really a problem with him. Although there was a faint premonition, due to the previous two experiences, this time it was not too hopeful either. However, if there were really no ideas, it was naturally impossible. Guemo was still somewhat disappointed. Or rather, he was even more anxious. After looking at the bill in his hand, Guemo sighed again and tore it into pieces before putting it in the nearby trash can. After completing this task, he walked out directly and reached out to stop a taxi on the roadside. Sitting in the taxi, watching the scenery outside the car window slowly recede, at this moment, a buzzing sound echoed in his ears again. %UN hashtag at. ZZ. $#% . Like the noise emitted by current interference, mixed with the piercing noise that seems to be from old-style radios. He had no expression on his face, didn't even frown, didn't show any signs, just reached out and casually pulled out his ear. At the same time, he took out his phone with the other hand and lowered his head to take a look. There is no new information, but the time displayed on the lit screen is the real focus. 7:00. It happened to be exactly 7 o'clock in the morning, which is really a time period belonging to early morning. It can be said that before dawn, Guemo had already taken a taxi to register and queue up. Time is running out. There's not much time left today. Although it was still early, Guemo couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency in his heart. He quickly calculated his remaining time for the day, then lifted his head and couldn't help but pat the back of the driver's seat in front of him. "Master, could you please drive faster? I'm in a hurry, thank you." "Okay." The driver answered calmly, but after nearly half a minute, the vehicle still maintained a steady state, only moving at a steady speed on the road, and seemed to have no intention of accelerating. "Okay. You're feeling lonely." Guemo tugged at the corner of his mouth, but didn't say anything more. "Forget it, there's still nearly an hour left, which should be enough to get home on your own. Don't worry about sleeping in the car. As long as there is no traffic jam next, there won't be any problems." He turned his head and continued to look at the scenery outside the window, comforting himself with increasing anxiety and depression in his heart. "I have been experiencing some serious problems since about a week ago." Guemo remembers that night when he was still playing black with his friends. It happened to be 12 o'clock in the morning, about the moment when a new day arrived. Suddenly, he heard a piercing noise from his earphones, as if electric current was passing through, or as if the signal was not good, and the voice channel was disrupted. At that time, his first reaction was that his earphones suddenly leaked electricity, and he was startled on the spot, so he immediately pulled off the earphone. "And even after the sound disappears, I dare not use that earphone again." Afterwards, the situation became unusually bizarre because basically every hour, he would hear strange noise, which was a very accurate cycle, repeating every 60 minutes with hourly intervals, no more or less. He realized he had a problem, but didn't have time to do anything. At 8 o'clock in the morning, he simply lost consciousness. Then, it wasn't until midnight that he woke up again. In the following week, Guemo continued to repeat this process. He had to sleep for 16 hours every day, and only 8 hours were spent awake. And they all wake up at 12 o'clock in the morning, and by 8 o'clock in the morning, they lose consciousness on time. Another thing is, between 12 a.m. and 8 a.m., every hour passed, Guemo would hear that noise that was like a buzzing electric current. It was a sound that only he could hear, as if it sounded directly in the depths of his mind, like a set of nerve reflexes bouncing through various parts of the cerebral cortex. Of course, no one would accept such a situation calmly. Guemo is also like this. He also feels that there may be something wrong with his body, such as central nervous system disease, so he has been shuttling back and forth between hospitals during this period. Unfortunately, no hospital has been able to give him a calming pill. Thinking of the same conclusion given by every hospital, he didn't know what to say. The air in the taxi was a bit dull, and the driver initially tried to tell a few jokes. However, because the passengers were not in the mood to respond, they quickly quieted down, and time passed by minute by minute. Finally, the car stopped in front of a residential area. "Master, you don't need to search anymore." "Okay, thank you." Feeling frustrated, Guemo waved his hand and didn't care about the small change. He was about to turn around and leave. However, in that moment, he saw a sudden red color appear on the taxi driver's head, and it seemed that a few strange things had drifted by something. Or what? Guemo was a bit unsure whether he had misread. "Teacher." Without a chance to intervene, he instinctively reached out his hand and watched as the driver stepped on the gas pedal, causing the vehicle to sped for a considerable distance. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared directly at the corner of the street ahead. Perhaps he had just gotten used to the slow speed of taxis, but now he suddenly saw such a fast departure. Guemo couldn't react for a moment and stood still, feeling a bit stunned. "I just made it drive faster and it started to grind. Why is it so fast now? Is it because the neural reflex arc is too long that it took so long to react?" He pondered for a moment, then looked around again. It was still quite early now, and there were not many people in the community. The downstairs was also very quiet and spacious. Guemo hesitated for a moment, then raised his phone to look at the current time. 7:49 zhong. There's no time left. His face turned a bit dark, and he decisively put aside what had just happened before turning around and walking quickly towards the community. He quickly went upstairs, opened the door and entered the house, ate some food as quickly as possible, and then checked the condition of the electrical doors and windows at home. Basically, the remaining time had already entered the countdown phase. And he also came to his bedroom and lay on the bed in the most comfortable position. After all, after a week, he had already figured out the pattern and naturally knew what he should do now. Time passed by second, and the time displayed on the phone skipped the last second. At exactly 8 o'clock, Guemo unexpectedly heard the strange noise ringing on time. In the next second, as if a logical drowsiness surged, he lost all perception of the outside world and the whole world was drifting away from him. In his unconscious mind, the seemingly meaningless pure noise still reverberated in his nerves, mixed with electrical interference. The sizzling sound was incredibly piercing, but as the rustling noise rolled by, fragmented fragments gradually became clearer. It's like an old radio being tuned bit by bit, although it still interferes severely, it can gradually distinguish a little useful information. ZZ. To protect ZZ's physical and mental health, users under the age of 18 will be restricted by the anti-addiction system. You have been offline for 8 hours today and are forced to log in. Please complete ZZ. Real name authentication as soon as possible. P.S. New book for newcomers, please provide guidance, end of this chapter. Chapter 2. Press the F key to use. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Press the F key to use. The time arrived the next day at midnight. Upon waking up, Guemo stood by the window with a pensive expression on his face, looking out at the city night view with a very complex expression in his eyes. The street not far from the residential area is a night market, and this is the busiest and most prosperous time. Snack stalls are steaming hot, and the shouting of vendors and the noise of people coming and going are accompanied by a fragrance drifting to this side. Going out at night in China is very dangerous because it is easy to gain weight. However, at this moment, Gu Mo's mind was not focused at all on this. Instead, he trembled his eyebrows and his gaze was subtly fixed on the pedestrians on the opposite street. Because the scene in his eyes was really magical, after waking up this time, the world in his eyes underwent a completely earth-shattering transformation. Or the kind that completely subverts the worldview. Simply put, when Gu Mo's gaze swept over the night market street and the focus of his gaze swept over every pedestrian on the opposite street, strange things quietly appeared above their heads. That's a few symbols, followed by a red groove pattern, with a percentage value dotted in the middle of the red groove. 91%. 99%. 86%. 89%. That's probably it. In such a bustling night market street, at a glance, the densely packed red bars and symbols almost overlap. Even at a distance, those symbols and patterns always present a magnified effect in his field of vision, allowing him to clearly see specific details and recognize each symbol and its corresponding value. So to speak, how does this look like a scene that only appears in games? Gu Mo looks at those people, at the ID and blood bar on their heads. This is because he doesn't know their names, so all the ID displays are question marks. So, when I came back yesterday, the same thing I saw on the top of the taxi driver's head. But at that time, the other party was running too fast and passed by in a flash, and I didn't fully see it. Wait. This is really off the charts. Well, it must be that my opening method is incorrect. Muttering to himself like this, Gu Mo was trying to persuade himself while reaching out and rubbing his eyes. He felt that the situation was getting worse and worse. How could it be that after seeing a doctor for a week, his problems not only did not get effectively solved, but also increased? The auditory hallucinations have not been resolved yet, and now the hallucinations have emerged. Is this a sign that your account is about to be cancelled by Earth OL? With his mind in a daze, he left the window and instinctively sat down by the bed, glancing over the nearby computer desk. In Gu Mo's field of vision, the message boxes resembling in-game prompts appeared one after another, flickering with a faint glow. The special effects were not particularly dazzling, but they could perfectly enhance their presence and attract his attention. Press the F key to open. This is a prompt that appears on the handle of the computer desk drawer. Press the F key to pick up. This is the information that appears on the ballpoint pen that is placed on the desktop. Press the F key to use. This is a floating box displayed on both computers and hard leather laptops on desks. At first glance, it was just a table-sized space, but in his field of vision, there were already 7 or 8 prompt boxes added up, each flickering with a faint glow. Is this a bit absurd? And where is the F key? Hey! Gu Mo had a complex expression on his face. He withdrew his gaze and pondered seriously, feeling that it was a night over a week ago when staying up all night was too harmful to his body. It must have been a manifestation of deep game poisoning. Although this speculation is really unreliable, it is currently the only two things that are related. It's not without other speculations, but in reality, the more people like to fantasize, the more they often understand what reality is. This world is neither gentle nor correct, miracles and magic do not exist. How many people, when faced with similar problems, actually feel like they are the son of fate, rather than worrying about their physical or mental health? Of course, a more important reason is that Gu Mo is currently only experiencing issues with what he sees. As for anything further like the golden finger, he did not see it, nor did he appear, not even the F key, nor did any system appear. Of course, he consciously believed that the possibility of his brain problems further intensified. Forget it, let's go eat something first. The aroma of food outside the window drifted in with the night breeze, and even Gu Mo, who was full of worries, couldn't help but be aroused by his appetite. He felt a pang of hunger coming from his stomach, and his empty stomach also made a timely protest. This is also an unavoidable thing. After all, his diet has been quite irregular during this period, as he only has 8 hours of wakefulness per day to be active, and the next 16 hours are in deep sleep. Because of this, when he wakes up, he often feels extremely hungry, so the street across from him has had an extra gluttonous diner who came to search for food at midnight on time for the past week, eating from the street to the end of the street. However, it can also be understood that after all, one can eat a full day's worth of food. And speaking of it, even though it's such an unhealthy diet and routine, being told by doctors that I'm very healthy is really a ghost. First, he took a shower, then regained his composure and changed into new clothes. He took the key and phone, and then left home. He quickly walked downstairs towards the outside of the community. Arriving at the gate of the entrance and exit of the community, he looked out at the street across the street, trying to dispel the illusions that made him restless. He pretended not to have seen them, and instead began to think about what to eat later. A burst of hearty laughter came to his ears. It's Xiaogu. Are you going out for a late-night snack again tonight? It's not like I'm talking about you. It's not okay to keep doing this all day long. Gu Mo looked up and, to his surprise, found the gatekeeper sitting in the duty room with a smiling expression on his face. Uncle Ding, you're on duty tonight. Gu Mo forced a smile and said hello, then couldn't help but hover his gaze above the head of the gatekeeper. Ding Hongxian, 76%. Is this because I know Uncle Ding's name, so it was clearly displayed in my imagination? And not only that, under the ID and health bar, there is also an additional row of neatly listed additional options, shimmering very clearly. View information. Add friends. Send a message. Invite to form a team. Transaction request. Okay, it really eliminates loneliness, there's no way to treat it as invisible. Gu Mo squinted his eyes slightly, then looked closely and found that the scene before him was still clear. And the people on the opposite street, although their IDs and health bars on their heads are also displayed, do not have as many details, perhaps due to distance. He instinctively pondered this way, but at the same time, he felt his mind becoming even more confused. It seems that both the world in his eyes and the worldview in his mind are gradually collapsing at the same time, but he has no way to correct it and can only watch helplessly. What's wrong, Xiaogu? Is there anything on my head? However, the guard uncle was a bit dizzy from Gu Mo's gaze. He instinctively reached out and touched his head, then looked up and saw the ceiling of the guard room, with the chandelier shining brightly above. Why has this young man been staring at him all the time, even though he has nothing? Just now, the gatekeeper, who felt a bit bored from working alone late at night, instinctively glanced at his phone on the table in front of him, which was displaying a pause screen for a horror movie. It was originally nothing, but at this moment, he couldn't help but think of it, feeling a bit fuzzy. It's nothing. Gu Mo slowly shook his head while trying to focus his attention on the first interaction option under the ID of the gatekeeper, which is the View Information option. In the field of vision that only he could see, the air rippled like water waves, and a new interface unfolded. Rows of simple information were succinctly listed downwards, from the most basic, identity information, including blood type, height, weight and so on, to some extended, personal hobbies, and other information entries. However, most of them are a line of question marks displaying, and do not show all the details of Uncle Go Wei in detail. Only a few items are very similar to game data, but they are clearly displayed: race, human, health level, level 1, occupation, civilian, career level, level 2. It's over, it's over. I did stay up late playing games and hurt my body, causing my brain to malfunction. Gu Mo suddenly had a nervous expression on his face, but he didn't know that the gatekeeper saw his expression and couldn't help but become nervous. The guard uncle is really starting to feel uneasy at this moment, and the sweat on his back is about to stand up. This little Gu may not be joking with him, but why is this expression so real? Looking at his head with a nervous expression, it seems like he has really seen a ghost. Xiao Gu, what's going on? Just tell uncle if you have anything to do. He pretended to be calm and laughed heartily as he spoke. It's nothing. Gu Mo shook his head again. Of course, this kind of thing cannot be openly told to others, and such words will only be regarded as mental illness. But perhaps you can subtly insinuate and explore whether you have a problem. Nothing. Is it really nothing? The gatekeeper uncle thinks this statement is very perfunctory, but why does he always feel that there is something behind it? Young people should not be too young, and the other person's behavior is too obvious, and there is no way to hide things. Uncle Ding, have you encountered anything recently? I mean, have you encountered any uncomfortable problems? Gu Mo was unaware that his performance had caused the guard uncle to misunderstand, and he was still pondering and trying to insinuate. His ultimate choice of starting point was to care about the other person's physical health. Because the blood bar he saw on the gatekeeper's uncle only showed 76%, not 100%. There is still a portion of the upper limit that appears yellow, so Gu Mo speculates that if all of this is true, it should mean that the gatekeeper's physical condition is not very good. After all, blood bar can also be seen as health value, in a sense, right? If a person loses a quarter of their health level, it's not considered good no matter what. That's why he had such a question, wanting to see if the other person had fallen ill recently, in order to verify whether he was just imagining or really having some special abilities. How could it be? I haven't encountered anything. Don't talk nonsense, Xiao Gu. I'm in good health. How did that sentence come from? My body is twice as good, it tastes so delicious. Here we go. Sure enough, that's what I asked. This is just a sideshow, trying to see if you have encountered any cult recently. The thought flashed through the gatekeeper's mind as he grinned and waved his hand repeatedly, firmly denying such a thing, but his tone was not very firm. He has indeed fallen ill recently, and his mental energy is not as good as before, but at this time he is unwilling to admit it. Because even if his heart is restless, reason still prevails, so he subconsciously resists the current topic and atmosphere, and does not want to be easily swayed by the rhythm. Well. Uncle Ding, please rest early. The wind is too strong at night, so don't sit for too long. Upon receiving such an answer, Gu Mo forced out a somewhat disappointed smile. Indeed, all of this was his imagination and illusion, and it was not realistic at all. Just after thinking for a moment, he was a bit hesitant and instinctively continued to look at the option displayed under the ID of the gatekeeper. Send a message. Do you want to stop trying? End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Sending failed. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Sending failed. The gatekeeper was alone in the duty room, eagerly watching Gu Mo walk out. I don't know what kind of psychology it was, but he realized that the other person gave up so decisively, and instead felt a sense of disappointment. There was a tension deep inside that he didn't even notice. Xiao Gu is really a bit nervous tonight. He comforted himself with this thought, while feeling a bit chilly late at night. Subconsciously, he looked around and felt that the community was too quiet and empty at night. What had just happened inevitably made him daydream. He lowered his head and looked at the still visible horror movie freeze frame on his phone. He quickly turned it off. At this moment, Gu Mo, who had not yet gone too far, couldn't help but turn back and gaze at the duty room behind him. He hesitated, his attention slightly focused. So the interactive box displaying "Send Message" flickered slightly, and then a new page replaced the original frame, appearing in front of him. It looked like clicking a new link on a computer, and the new pop.up page popped up. Looking at the semi-transparent input box in front of him, he noticed a flickering vertical line in the upper left corner. Gu Mo tugged at the corner of his mouth, feeling that the interface he saw in front of him was really the same as when typing on a computer, especially the cursor in the input bar, was no different. Why is it one's own imagination, even though it is so real and clear? Why do I have such illusions myself? With a gloomy sigh, Guemo turned around and walked towards the opposite road. He had not yet decided whether to try again, or whether he should first talk to Uncle Ding and ask him to cooperate with him in testing. After just a moment of contemplation, Guemo denied this idea. Don't be fooled by the amiable appearance of this gatekeeper. Everyone in the community actually knows how difficult it is for this stubborn old man to get along with, especially when it comes to trouble. He has a loud voice and likes to point behind his back very much. Once he finds out about every little detail in someone else's house, it will spread throughout the entire community in less than half an hour. Often, it is still through the old man's improvisation and adaptation of the humorous version. Don't be fooled by the fact that both sides were still greeting each other earlier. The main issue is still politeness. After all, it's not easy to show any conflicts in person if you don't look up or down. Actually, I'm not that familiar with it. When Guemo just moved here last year, he was rumored because he was relatively homey. Although it's not a big deal, it's still a bad experience. So he thought about it and let it go. If he had gone out for a late-night snack and came back, news of himself being mentally ill would have already spread throughout the community. That would be really frustrating. Let's watch for ourselves. Well, it's also good to try it out, at least to confirm if it's his own problem. As for whether this will be exposed, Guemo thought for a moment and felt that there's no need to worry too much. Not to mention that everyone knows about Ding's big mouth. If anyone says something obviously absurd, it won't be believed. What are you talking about? Why don't you go to heaven? As long as a few passers-by discover a little secret, they will be immediately wanted and sliced by the country, which is the most absurd, unless the entire country is a bee colony consciousness. Moreover, as long as they refuse to admit it, even Mr. Ding himself will suspect that it is his own problem. Guemo has a lot of experience in this. This little Gu really came to play tricks on me in the middle of the night. Oh, young people nowadays are getting worse and worse from generation to generation. The gatekeeper, who was still alone in the duty room, was muttering to himself at this moment, seemingly trying to ease his nervousness slightly, not knowing what the main person he had buried was pondering. The incident just now really made him feel a little flustered. Although he refused to believe it rationally, he couldn't help but become a bit distracted, with various wild thoughts in his mind. I just feel that the more I think about this matter, the more strange it becomes, and even subconsciously associate it with some particularly strange directions. How could this be possible? The gatekeeper shook his head vigorously, dispelling the increasingly unreliable thoughts of a violent rampage in his mind. He couldn't help but have wild thoughts. However, just at this very moment, Ding Hongxian. A somewhat familiar voice rang out directly in the ears of the gatekeeper. Didn't Xiaogu just walk out of the entrance passage in front of the duty room? When did he enter the duty room and stand behind him? And it's impolite to call yourself by your name directly. The gatekeeper was naturally stunned for a moment, then wanted to turn around and scold him displeasedly, but his gaze swept over the surveillance screen next to the table. In an instant it was like an electric current flowing through his spine, and his chilling fear forced him to stop his turn and almost twisted his neck. Because from the surveillance footage, he was the only one in the duty room, and behind him was empty. What happened to the sentence I just heard? After realizing it, the guard uncle's pupils tightened to the size of a needle, and his face instantly turned gray. He felt a chill rising from the bottom of his feet to the sky, his scalp tingling with numbness, his blood freezing all over his body, and his heart pounding wildly in his chest as if about to fly. It's like going back to the day when I was a child and seeing a vicious dog roaring and charging towards me, my mind blank and I dare not move. Sweating in the palms of his hands, numbness in the soles and scalp of his feet, and weak legs, the gatekeeper felt like something was standing behind him, waiting for him to turn around or respond. Just like in folklore, when someone suddenly called out his name at night, and once he turned around or agreed, the person was gone. Ding Hongxian. A faint voice rang in his ears again, as if someone was calling him right next to him. If it could be explained earlier that he had misunderstood, then this time there was no way he could deceive himself. However, the surveillance footage showed only his own figure in the duty room. Did Xiaogu really see it just now? Is there really something in the duty room that I'm learning from Xiaogu's voice and calling myself from behind? The gatekeeper's face was colorless, and his body was trembling slightly without moving. He was determined not to turn back or respond. Sure enough, what am I really looking forward to? Under the green trees on the sidewalk, which was a distance from the duty room, Guemo used the shadows of the night to cover himself and sighed disappointed again. Why don't you just give up when you overthink? Take a look at the gatekeeper over there, sitting in the duty room with his head down staring at the table in front of him. He must be playing with his phone. He is so focused and motionless that he is completely unaffected, which proves that the message he sent has not appeared and is not a real phenomenon. I have sent 2 messages in a row. If I could really be seen, wouldn't there be no response at all? Well, wait, may it be because I didn't add friends, so I can't send messages? Do you want to stop trying? After staring at the add friend option for several seconds, Guemo finally shook his head, and his stomach also timely heard a clear growl. No, I need to find a place to eat quickly. I feel like I'm starving to death. Guemo quickly gave up the meaningless temptation and accepted the cruel reality that he was simply sick. At the same time, driven by hunger, he decisively turned around and walked towards the nearby night market. Only the gatekeeper in the duty room was gritting his teeth and persevering, his body not daring to move, as if it were a sculpture. Cannot move. You can't turn back. Never make a sound. About half a minute later, on the night market snack street. That foodie is here again. I don't know if it's an illusion, but Guemo always felt like many vendors were looking at him with such eager eyes. Just thinking about it seemed right, after all, he has always appeared here on time as a starving ghost for the past week. After a moment of thought, although Guemo felt very hungry, he still didn't follow the previous principle of proximity and just ate along the way, because people always want some face, and he was no exception. He didn't want people to look at him with a bucket-like gaze. It's okay to say it once or twice, but if you keep being seen by the same people more times, then this label is probably going to be taken seriously. So he ignored the eager gazes of the vendors around him. Although as he walked past the stall, the voices of greeting and shouting on both sides became more enthusiastic and hard-working, he did not stop, but walked mercilessly over. The snack street is very bustling, especially during this time period. Leaving the familiar road ahead of the community, Guemo looked around and continued to move forward. Perhaps because it was too lively, the snack shops and late-night stalls on both sides were overcrowded. Even though he wanted to find a place to eat quickly, it seemed that the queue would probably take a while, so after hesitating for a while, he still gave up. Walk further and find a family that doesn't have as many stores. He thought this way and continued walking along the street, but from the street to the end, he found that there were the same number of people everywhere. It seems there's nothing we can do but to honestly queue up and wait for our turn. Disappointed, Guemo suddenly stopped and turned his head to look at the small alley next to him. The alley was a bit dark, with no streetlights, and it was vaguely visible that at the end, there seemed to be another street across from him, with numerous storefronts. This made him subconsciously feel a subtle sense of discord. When was there another commercial street next to the snack street? But this is not the point is that there is a faint aroma coming from over there. What flavor? It smells so good. For a moment, Guemo couldn't even control himself. He was already starving, and suddenly smelling this aroma, he couldn't bear it anymore. He was almost confused, and his body had to react faster than his brain to take action. Entering the dimly lit alley, he suddenly heard a buzzing sound in his ears, mixed with the noise of electric current. There seemed to be some fragmented information in the buzzing sound, and he frowned sharply. What the hell? Why isn't the situation happening all the time? The hallucinations are starting to become irregular. This is not the time to explore, and stopping to ponder is meaningless. After all, the situation has been going on for a long time, so Guemo frowned and continued to cross the alley after the current-like noise disappeared. He came to the other side of the street and followed the smell to stand in front of a shop. This seems to be a Japanese-style restaurant, and the taste comes from inside. Guemo instinctively looked up and then hesitated for a moment, because the sign displayed Japanese and he couldn't understand. Hey, wait, was it just that he was dizzy? He blinked in confusion. After the vision became clearer again, the text on the sign was clear and clearly told him that the name of this restaurant was Xingping Restaurant. Is it true that I was so hungry that I felt dizzy just now? When I saw a Japanese-style restaurant, I instinctively thought that the signs were all in Japanese that I couldn't understand. And when I concentrate a little bit and my mind clears up a bit, I realize it's not like that anymore. Probably. Because he knew about his own situation, Guemo didn't think too much about it. Anyway, his illusions and fantasies were so severe, so it's not surprising to try them again now. However, the name of this restaurant seems somewhat familiar. Have you seen it somewhere before? For a moment, he couldn't remember it and didn't think much. Instead, he walked directly into the restaurant and quickly looked around. On the wall behind the counter, there were neatly arranged wooden signs with concise and written names and prices. Guemo doesn't have any choice difficulties, especially now when he's so hungry that he can't bear it. His gaze quickly sweeps over, immediately ruling out those options that look expensive and have strange names. Among the remaining options, he tends to know what he knows. Chuangjin, once we finish tidying up over there, we'll go and extinguish the fire in the charcoal stove. The man behind the counter was cleaning the utensils at the sink, and at the same time, he remembered something and shouted without looking back. Without a response, he glanced slightly and found his son standing not far away, wiping the freshly cleaned tea set while muttering to himself in a trance. Today's fried rice should be stir-fried in the pot 3 more times. The man was stunned for a moment, then showed a contented expression. Next moment, boss. An egg fried rice. A duck buckwheat noodle. Without looking at what the two people behind the counter were doing, Guemo had already picked out the night snack he had ordered. He reached out to pat the table, pointed to the corresponding menu, and began ordering in one breath. Dot. Dot. The father and son looked at each other, unable to react for a moment. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Magic Food. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 5. Is a big problem, panic is useless. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 is a big problem, panic is useless, hee, guessed, you're joking. Although I felt that this late-night diner was talking serious nonsense, since it was just a joke, it was not a big deal. Fortunately, Shinichiro Haihei naturally wouldn't take this seriously, so he just smiled and brought up the topic. And precisely because of this, Guemo only felt that the other party was humble and did not realize where the problem really lay. So, the boss and the diner praised each other a few more words, and the scene was friendly and enjoyable. Customer, we have basically run out of ingredients, said Nobunaga politely, looking at several empty plates on the table. Although we continued to receive this simple guest as an exception, it is an objective fact that the ingredients in the store have been used up. After opening a restaurant for so long, he naturally knows how many ingredients should be prepared every day, which is basically exactly what can be consumed. At most, there is a little surplus, but more is wasted. He is also unwilling to stock up on too many ingredients in the store, and basically exchanges them with fresh ones every day. Is this really gone at all? Blinking his eyes, although Guemo knew this was the truth, he was still a bit reluctant to leave like this. After all, eating 80% full means he wasn't completely full, but just ate the magical food here. How could he tolerate the realistic and picturesque food outside? It's really not there anymore. Yukihiro Masayoshi answered with a hint of helplessness. Being asked by diners like this would indeed make the chef happy, but unfortunately, a clever woman cannot cook without rice. Cough, Dad, actually there are still some. At this moment, a pretentious cough came from beside them. The two of them turned their heads and saw the young man standing at the counter, holding a plate in his hand, as if offering a treasure. I made some improvements after the evening, and the current dish should. I suddenly feel like I'm full again. Guillermo blinked his eyes, convinced that the dishes on the plate he saw were in a faint silver font, mixed with some eerie twisted black air effects, completely different from the special effects of the previous meal where even the font was golden. Therefore, he decisively changed his mind and made a decision. Wait, I haven't started yet. Xinping Chuang seemed to be greatly affected. Are you so decisive? He hasn't even had time to introduce his innovative work, and he hasn't even mentioned the name yet. He was originally thinking that he could get some more useful advice from this simple diner. By the way, boss, do you operate here until this time every day? Guillermo asked him a question of concern. This restaurant is so good and affordable, and it's so close to our home. It's only a short walk of 500 meters when we go downstairs. He thinks that if possible, he can come and help us in the future. Maybe that's the case. Shinichiro Kohei smiled and said, the specifics still depend on the situation. Today is relatively late. So. Guillermo raised his eyebrows. So, according to his current situation, he may not be able to catch up every day. My daily routine is very regular now. I wake up every 16 hours and always wake up at midnight every day. If this store had already closed by then, wouldn't it be a waste of time? Well, I'm not sure if they accept pre-order takeout services. As he thought about it, he stood up and walked straight to the counter, reaching out to touch his phone. He just scanned the counter and found that there was no payment code at all. He shrugged his shoulders, not too concerned, after all, he also had cash on him. Because sometimes it is necessary to use it, for example, some elderly people set up stalls or keep shops, and they are not very receptive to mobile payment. Guillermo also didn't want to make them difficult, so he would prepare some cash with him to some extent. It's better to be prepared than to be prepared. For example, now, this store clearly does not support electronic payment services. Just as Guillermo took out his wallet, his gaze noticed an additional interactive box in front of the counter in his field of vision. Buy. He didn't think too much, just like everyone with cheap hands. He hesitated for a moment and instinctively focused his attention, so a new interface popped up in front of him. The new list is listed, with long strings of menus arranged in order, and the top is the egg fried rice and other dishes he ordered before, showing a selected color, and the price is also marked beside it. At the bottom, it is natural to have the option of payment, and the total price is also marked next to it. Guillermo focused his attention on the payment option, watching its icon color rapidly change from yellow to dark. After a second of gradient, another line of font popped out in the middle. 65, the whole process was like this, making him feel very familiar, and the whole person couldn't help but be slightly distracted. Okay, thank you for your patronage. Just as Guillermo was in a daze, Xinping Chuangjin, who was behind the counter, had already proficiently counted the money, collected the coins, and placed them in the cashier. At the same time, he thanked him loudly with a spirited voice. Although he had just been a bit discouraged, he quickly adjusted his mentality. Then, the boy saw the guest in front of him blink his eyes, as if he had just woken up from a dream, revealing a subtle expression. What's going on, customer? Is there any problem? Xinping Chuang asked strangely. Is it waiting for him to change money? But the other party just gave enough, not a penny, where can I get change? No, Well, I just thought of something else, so I got distracted. Guillermo reacted and explained in this way. Then, he glanced at the wallet in his hand and seemed hesitant as he slowly turned around and walked away, taking 1, 2, 3 steps until he walked out of the store and was not stopped. He was particularly surprised. Did he really pay like this? Looking back inside, I found that Xingping and his son were already packing their things again. It seemed awkward to ask again at this moment. So he looked around and walked towards the other side of the street. After avoiding the Xingping restaurant, he used the light of the street lights on the roadside and opened his wallet in confusion to count. He found that the change he had with him was exactly 65 yuan less, which corresponded perfectly to the situation just now. Gu Mo's expression suddenly became somewhat solemn. He hesitated for a moment and tentatively called out, muttering words in his mouth, "System. Deep Blue. Come out. I need to add more." For the next few minutes, I tried to call out my golden finger to prove that I wasn't having a mental problem. Of course, nothing happened, only passers-by instinctively quickened their pace as they passed by, and a circle of people gathered around him pointing with crazy eyes. Gu Mo sighed dejectedly, giving up his persistent delusions. He looked around at the people pointing, and sure enough, happiness belonged to others and he had nothing. Looking at the phenomenon from a rational perspective again, Gu Mo forced himself to calm down, feeling that there seemed to be a more reasonable possibility. If it was all his imagination just now, perhaps it was actually that he had honestly paid for it, but in his imagination, it was another matter. Just like some mental illnesses, he had seen an example before. Perhaps it was due to delusions that he was poisoned too deeply, holding a kitchen knife and insisting that he was the supreme martial arts master with a dragon-slaying sword, firmly believing that he was a great master and a master of both sword and sword. Perhaps in the eyes of others, this kind of behavior may seem comical and absurd, but the most frightening thing is, the parties themselves truly believe that their logic and worldview are correct. Is it a bit similar? In the eyes of others, the mentally ill person took a knife, and the mentally ill person knows they took a knife, but the latter thinks they actually took a dragon-slaying knife. And what about Gu Mo's current situation? Perhaps he just paid, but he felt that he had completed the payment through a method similar to system transfer. So, what is the difference between myself and the former mental illness? It's just that the other person thinks he's a martial arts master, and I just started to suspect that I have some golden fingers. Well, it seems everything is reasonable now. After such a profound self-analysis, Gu Mo felt that he gradually understood everything. Is this the world of people with mental problems? He used to feel very puzzled, but now he finally understands that the world of mental patients is really completely different from what normal people see. If a person always sees, hears, and feels a world that is different from a normal person, and their cognition is also different from that of a normal person, then being out of place is normal. Glancing at the people pointing around him, Gu Mo rubbed his cheeks and quickly left. Speaking of which, the doctor once suggested that he see a psychiatric hospital, but he didn't follow the advice at the time. It was probably because he had read too much bad news about the psychiatric hospital, so he was also somewhat worried that if he was diagnosed with serious problems, he might be sent to the hospital high-wall power grid, closed wards, forced sedation, abuse. Such things, or not all situations are so dark, and the current era is not as chaotic as before in terms of management. However, whether it is prejudice or stubbornness, since he has already left such an impression based on the information he received in the past, he naturally strongly opposes this possibility. No, we can't go on like this anymore. We have to save ourselves. Gu Mo secretly made up his mind. Perhaps it was because of the positive emotions that the recent cooking had stimulated him. He was now full of determination and full of action, so he also decided what he had to do. Continuing to see a doctor should not help much, and he respected and distanced himself from the psychiatric department. So, first, adjust your regular routine to ensure good physical health. After a while, see if you can improve. At the same time, continue to play the role of a normal person to avoid being discovered by others, and ultimately be sent to a mental hospital. He quickly made a decision and formulated future action guidelines. At the end of the day, my situation is not so serious that I fully believe it, nor do I feel like a martial arts master like that person. The differences in cognition and behavior are not particularly significant, and there should still be a chance to correct it. Well, he feels that his advantage is relatively significant, and he has a very optimistic idea. 1 minute later. %UN hashtag at. ZZ. $hashtag % at. As he returned from the original path and crossed the dimly lit alley again, Guillermo heard the piercing torment of auditory hallucinations once again. It seems that there is an electric current flowing through his brain nerves, causing him to furrow his brows and feel very uncomfortable. This feeling is much worse than the experience of some pointed nail scraping on the blackboard. What kind of ghost? With a low murmur, he walked out of the alley and returned to the soft light of the snack street in front of the community. Immediately after, he felt the piercing and uncomfortable feeling in his mind quickly recede like a tide. Is there any problem with this alley? He turned around and looked at the pitch-black and dim alley behind him, slightly puzzled. After all, when he first walked in, it was like this, and now when he comes out, it is still like this. Such a coincidence cannot help but make him feel strange. He tilted his head, reached out and scratched his cheek, then turned around and left. The snack street here is still bustling, and based on experience, this situation will continue until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. At that time, people would gradually disperse, and various snack stalls and storefronts would gradually close and close. This is a pattern that Guillermo has gradually summarized over the past week. After touching his stomach, which was only 8% full, he walked straight to the nearest snack stall. About 5 minutes later. Looking at the barbecue that had taken a bite in his hand, Guillermo had a serious expression on his face and frowned tightly. He knew it would be like this, from simplicity to luxury, from luxury to frugality is difficult. For the taste sensation that had just tasted so delicious, the threshold of stimulation was raised to a somewhat exaggerated level in a short period of time. So much so that ordinary food now tastes like chewing wax to him. Unconsciously, the time arrived around 7 o'clock in the morning. Guillermo just returned to the community. He didn't go to the hospital overnight to register anymore. He queued up early in the morning to take the lead, but he also didn't want to waste the remaining activity time of the day. Xiao Gu, why did you leave so early this morning? Good morning, Director Zhang. After looking at the middle-aged woman in the nearby duty room, feeling a bit tired, Guillermo extended his hand to greet her and then took the initiative to explain, I didn't go out early in the morning, but I went out at midnight last night and only came back now. Well, I found a job and will start working night shifts during this time. He wants to play the role of a normal person well, so considering his current situation, he thinks it is necessary to explain it first. This way, his future situation of working day and night will not be so prominent and suspicious. Going out to work night shifts at night, and not going out to sleep during the day is reasonable. So. Director Zhang nodded, seemingly not surprised, but with a slightly hesitant expression. Did you talk to Mr. Ding last night when you went out? Gu Maden's heart trembled as he said, yes, what's wrong? No, right. Did you not say anything last night, just acting a bit strange? Old Ding just had such a big mouth and went around saying he had a problem. Sure enough, I already knew that old man with a loud voice was restless and kind-hearted. It's nothing, just. When you were talking, you didn't say anything strange, did you? Director Zhang hesitated and said, pondering. Last night, old Ding, who was on the night shift, ran into evil. Although it was not a big deal, he was also scared enough. I couldn't explain what was going on when I asked him, but he kept saying that there was a ghost in the duty room. Anyway, Director Zhang felt a bit flustered when he said it seriously. She checked the surveillance early this morning and found that at around 12 o'clock, only Xiao Gu left the community. She even talked to Lao Ding for a while. At that time, Lao Ding seemed to have no problems, and since then, Lao Ding has been sitting in his seat staring at his phone. It seems to be acting very normally. If it weren't for the next hour or so, he wouldn't dare to move. Of course, just looking at the surveillance footage still doesn't reveal anything, and Director Zhang has no way to promote feudal superstitions. He can only ask Guo indirectly to see if he said something that may have stimulated Mr. Ding. Did you say something strange yourself? Sure enough, this is it. Old Ding must be spreading his own rumors like this. Guo was extremely vigilant in his heart and was even more convinced of his guess. At the same time, he frowned and pretended to have a confused expression. No, I didn't say anything, I just said hello. He will never admit it. And from now on, no matter what strange and confusing brain teasers appear again, he must continue to play the role of a normal person well. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. The Original Intention, Copper. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. The Original Intention, Copper. There were no unexpected gains, but it was also expected. Director Zhang didn't think Xiao Gu could know anything, and the surveillance footage was clearly displayed. At that time, Lao Ding was in the duty room and Xiao Gu was walking outside. The two of them just said a few words and greeted each other, but there was no contact at all. Moreover, after Xiao Gu left, Lao Ding did not experience any problems, and the incident of encountering evil spirits happened an hour later. To put it bluntly, it's difficult to deceive people, especially when it comes to hitting evil spirits. So this middle-aged woman hesitated and said that the public security has not been good lately, so she asked him to be more careful and confused the reason for her questioning. And of course, Guo knew it wasn't for this reason, but he didn't guess the specifics either. He just thought it was Ding Lao's talent for breaking his mouth and starting to spread rumors about himself. This made him somewhat skeptical, whether it was Mr. Ding's imagination that could only leap forward so far on this level. When he saw his short sleeves, he immediately thought of his white arms, so his behavior was just a little strange, and he could immediately associate it with his own problems. Is it true that I am just showing such obvious flaws in the eyes of others, and have already appeared suspicious? However, it's not too late to make up for the lost sheep. He has already made up his mind to play the role of a normal person from now on, so that no one can see the problem. When I got home, I first took a shower, then threw the washed clothes into the washing machine, tidied up everything, dried my hair, and lay down on the bed. After such a series of actions, he picked up his phone and looked at it, only to find that there was still about half an hour left in time. Taking a gentle breath, Guo didn't know if he should be happy about it, which showed that he seemed to have gradually become accustomed to the current rhythm. Sure enough, people are forced to do it. But this is also a helpless thing. His current situation is like this. Can there be any other methods besides adaptation? Or maybe we need to consider moving. Recalling the incident where Director Zhang had just stopped him for questioning, such thoughts couldn't be suppressed in his mind. Guo began searching for nearby rental services on his phone. Although there seemed to be some suspicion of nervousness, he felt it was better to be safe. The elderly parents in this community are the most concentrated, and Mr. Ding is just the one with a broken mouth, but he is definitely not the only one, let alone the one with the strongest combat power. What's even more terrifying is that these gentlemen and aunties don't know if they are mecha fans, and they understand the key to combining can enhance combat effectiveness. They often gather together to catch shadows from nothing, and the power of gossip also increases exponentially. I was really foolish at first, that's why I thought the conditions here were good and moved to this place. So it's better to move to another place. No one knows you in the new place. Well, there's no need to move too far. After all, in these days, the social circles of people in the city are fragmented, and often people in a community can't recognize each other. It's not like being in a rural area or something like that, leaving one's own village. However, the neighboring village, as well as the neighboring village, may have heard of oneself by anyone, or may have had connections with one's 7th or 8th aunt. So as long as you are far away from 2 streets, it is estimated that the people in this community will never find you again. In a while, you should forget that you are still the number one person. Well, it's best to move next to that restaurant. If it's very close, even if they don't have any takeout services, they can still leave me a reservation. Thinking of this further strengthened Gu Mo's idea of moving away. Perhaps it was really due to his own imagination and hallucinations. Last night, he searched everywhere for food, wandered through various late-night stalls in the city, and finally found that those things were difficult to swallow. Well, by the way, what was the name of that street before? Looking up and pondering for a while, Gu Mo realized that he had not paid attention to the news and could not use it as an address to search for nearby rental businesses. After thinking for a moment, he lowered his head and opened the delivery app, entering the 4 words, Xingping Restaurant, as the key words. Click search, and in less than a second, a new page pops up. Xingping Restaurant, Xingping Catering, Happiness Restaurant. A series of similar search results have been listed, and the nearest, Xingping Restaurant, is all located 7 kilometers away, but apart from that, the main owner has not been found. With a raised eyebrow, Gu Mo was not surprised either. He had already anticipated this. After all, there were no scanning methods such as mobile payment in the store. Therefore, it is reasonable that this store did not have a takeout service and did not register on the platform. Forget it, let's go and take a look tomorrow. After looking at the time displayed on his phone, he let out a long sigh, put it away, and adjusted his position with both hands holding his head, trying to sleep more comfortably. He knew what would happen next, and as time passed, his eyes would turn black and he would lose consciousness. When I open my eyes again and my perception and thinking abilities are back online, it will be midnight the next morning when I am full of energy. Oh my goodness, his sleep has never been so good before. However, this is definitely not a good thing, and Gu Mo did not find it acceptable, especially now that he has decided to save himself, thinking that he still has a chance to correct it. I also know that this is abnormal, which is his biggest advantage and proof that his condition is still relatively mild. If it were like the mentally ill person he had seen, he would have completely accepted the new persona, adapted to a completely distorted worldview, and felt that holding a fruit knife was the supreme martial arts, a precious sword for slaying dragons. That's probably really hopeless. 10, 9, 8, 7. Silently counting the seconds in his heart, Gu Mo regained his energy, widened his eyes, and repeatedly warned himself. I am very energetic, it is still early, I am normal, and I don't feel any problems with myself. I can't sleep, I can't sleep, I can't sleep, I don't want to sleep. 4, 3, 2, 1, it's time. Accompanied by a piercing auditory hallucination that seemed to be mixed with electricity, his eyes darkened, his consciousness quickly became hazy, and the reality connected by sensory perception quickly moved away. %UN hashtag at. ZZ. Dollar hashtag % at dot. Scene. Xingping meal. ZZ. Dollar hashtag %. Difficulty. Simple. Exploring the current scene. ZZ. Dollar hashtag %. ZZ. Field. Dollar hashtag %. Mode. Peace. Task triggered. 0, completed task. ZZ. Dollar hashtag %. Comprehensive evaluation. F. Lowest evaluation. If the current passes through the nerves, the chaotic noise is meaningless, but there are also some intermittently clear or blurry fragments of fragmented information mixed in, which can be barely distinguished through repeated cycles. However, for parties who have already been forcibly taken offline, these things are equivalent to non-existent. Unlocking achievements. ZZ. Dollar hashtag %. Obtain the title, Primordial Heart, Bronze, and the title badge gain effect will be activated by default. Your dollar hashtag %. Life level has been increased to level 1, obtaining 1 free attribute point. Please carefully choose the direction of point investment. %UN hashtag at. Users under the age of 18 will be subject to anti-addiction measures. ZZ. Online time has reached 8 hours and will be forcibly taken offline. Please complete this as soon as possible. ZZ, %UN #@ Real name authentication. Amidst the piercing noise and rustling sound, it was like an old TV malfunctioning and a strange sound coming from the snowflake screen. However, after the last fragmented message was played, everything came to a stop and there was no further movement, except for the young people in bed who had a long and quiet breath. Seems to be sleeping in a beautiful dream. I don't know how long it has been. Still familiar with the sensation of electric currents passing through nerves, the first auditory sensation to recover felt the piercing torment, followed by a comprehensive return to sensory perception. It is not the gradual recovery of bodily functions from sleep, the gradual consolidation of willpower and the gradual restoration of clarity of mind when people wake up from sleep, but rather a very abrupt kind. How should we describe it? Anyway, I slept soundly the first second, but suddenly woke up the next second, and he said he was completely awake, all the drowsiness disappeared, and the whole person was full of energy and full of energy. This feeling is really strange and difficult to describe. Looking at the benefits, at least there's no problem with being bedridden. Guo sat up straight in bed and blinked his eyes. In the dimly lit room, he saw the fluorescent screen of the electronic clock on the bedside table, which showed him the time. He woke up on time at exactly midnight today. He shook his head, put on his shoes, and got out of bed. In the past, the main reason for lying in bed was because he couldn't sleep enough, and when he woke up, he was still very tired, so he wished he could squint for a while longer. Even if he used double wasting time, he was willing to do so, but now every time I wake up, I feel mentally exhausted and have no drowsiness at all. Naturally, I don't want to sleep for a while longer, so I don't have the thought or necessity of lying in bed. This is probably the only benefit that Guo has discovered from his strange symptoms so far. It seems that yesterday's persistence failed, and the psychological construction was not successful. As soon as time came, I simply fell asleep. With this thought in mind, he went to the bedside table, picked up the electronic clock, and looked at it. Today, he also woke up with an accuracy of seconds. It seems that yesterday morning, he should have slept in with an accuracy of seconds. Although it is said that as long as one exercises normally and has a normal daily routine, the physiological clock can be controlled more accurately than humans imagine. It is said that horse racing jockeys even have a physiological clock measured in tenths of a second. However, under normal circumstances, Guo feels that he does not have this ability. Why can the physiological clock in the body be calculated in seconds when it is in a diseased state? Well, the world of mental patients is truly unimaginable. He put down the electronic clock, turned around, and picked up the clothes hanging from the chair on the computer desk next to him. It was already prepared before he was about to fall asleep yesterday morning, because he needed it the next day. Entering the bathroom, Guo quickly brushed his teeth and washed his face, solved his personal problems, and then took a good shower. After coming out, his hair was still wet and he didn't even glance at the hair dryer. Instead, he decisively picked up the key, grabbed his phone and wallet, and rushed downstairs. After all, he didn't know when that restaurant would be open. It was said that it was already quite late last night, and he didn't know if he could make it today. This made him feel a sense of urgency. If possible, he didn't even want to wash up and just got up and killed him. Xiao Gu, you're still going out so late. At the entrance and exit of the community, the middle-aged man in the duty room heard the commotion and nervously raised his head to look outside. He only breathed a sigh of relief after realizing that it was Guo. Yeah, I've been looking for a night shift job lately. Guo, although a bit anxious, stopped to patiently explain in order to maintain his normal daily routine. Then he looked at the middle-aged man with a strange expression, but Uncle Zhang, why are you on duty tonight? Isn't Mr. Ding on duty this week? Lao Ding, he has something to do these days. I'll help him take a look. The middle-aged man's expression suddenly became a bit strange, and he answered with a slightly stiff smile. Well, then pay attention to your health and don't freeze in the strong wind at night. Guemo nodded and casually asked a question, so without careful consideration, he waved his hand and quickly walked out. Watching the young man's figure disappear outside the window, the middle-aged man nervously glanced outside several times, looking somewhat suspicious when he sat back in his seat. He doesn't believe in Mr. Ding's nonsense, but it's undeniable that those words do make his heart furry now. 2 minutes later. How could that be? I remember it was clearly here. After walking back and forth several times on the street near the end of the snack street, Guemo ignored the enthusiastic solicitation from the owners or waiters of the shops and stalls on both sides, and opened his eyes wide to look back and forth. Impossible. How could this be? In his impression, the small alley leading to the commercial street on the other side was right here. But now what appeared in front of him was just a dead end, filled with various miscellaneous items, and a rusty and mottled iron door locked tightly, looking like it was a bit old. Do you think you remember wrong? He looked back with a complicated heart, then turned around and walked towards that area. On the other side of the street, he looked around and then his eyes lit up. The dim alley, there is a light at the end of the opposite side. It turns out that I made a mistake. It's not over there, but over here. He suddenly breathed a sigh of relief, then took a decisive step inside, frowned amidst another piercing buzzing and noise, and finally walked through the dimly lit alley to the other side. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Has nothing to fear anymore. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 has nothing to fear anymore. The lights are brightly lit, and various neon signs are flashing. The shops and buildings on both sides are lined up, making it look like a very prosperous neighborhood. Did you come to this place yesterday? I guess so, I can't quite remember clearly. At that time, my attention was all focused on that restaurant, and I was extremely hungry. I followed the aroma and walked to the entrance of the store in a daze. Basically, that's it. As for other details on this street, I really didn't pay attention. After thinking about it for a moment, Guemo scratched his cheek, looked around on both sides, and walked forward. Anyway, it must be right here, and it shouldn't be too far. Just look for it. He wandered back and forth on the street with such thoughts for a long time, but his brow relaxed from the beginning and became more and more furrowed. No, what about the restaurant? What about a bigger restaurant? Yesterday it was clearly here, why didn't it disappear today? This commercial street is not lacking in restaurants, but none of them are the very distinctive restaurants in his impression. He carefully looked at them and walked from the street to the end, but was stunned and didn't see even a familiar word in the end. Guemo began to doubt life as a whole. He stood still, raised his fist and placed it on his chin, lost in thought. What exactly is wrong? He couldn't understand the problem. It was just a simple matter, but why did he suddenly feel like it had become more complicated? Although it is true that I did not remember the detailed location, it cannot be justified. After all, even if we take into account the area on the other side of the alley, which is a place with a big nose, it is at most slightly larger than the Vatican. It's possible that on the map of the food delivery software, we have to zoom in to the limit to find the place name. So, there's no reason to come over the next day and not find that store. No matter how confused I was at that time, logically speaking, it must have been near this area. Standing in place and looking around, Guemo continued to walk forward. He doesn't believe that even yesterday's store itself was a product of his imagination and imagination. He is more willing to believe that it may be because he didn't grasp the distance well, or that it should be a bit ahead of him. Well, it's not impossible either. After all, when he came over, he was confused and unconsciously walked to the entrance of the store, and when I left, I was also absent-minded, and I didn't know when I would return to the snack street. I didn't have much impression of the process in between. While qualitatively defining and rationalizing this matter in his mind, Guemo continued to look forward. He walked for a while without giving up, and the shops on both sides gradually became sparse. He looked left and right, then changed direction and walked that way. From frugality to luxury was easy, from luxury to frugality was difficult, and the stimulation threshold was raised to such an extent by the impact of yesterday's delicious food. It was difficult for him to convince himself to accept ordinary food now. Besides, it's really good quality and affordable. Basically, within the same price range, why not choose the best one? With such thoughts in mind, he worked hard and meticulously on a carpet-style search, and it didn't take long for it to pass. In the end, it was only natural for him to achieve nothing. Gone oh. This script is obviously not quite right. Guillermo stopped his futile steps, his eyebrows and eyes furrowed. He seriously doubted whether he had found the wrong direction from the beginning, or should he have followed his own perception from the beginning and found the better direction from the other side. This idea is not easy to evaluate. After all, he was hesitant to walk from the other side until he realized there was no way there. He has been walking until now, and he has come to this place, speaking of which. Where is this? He found that he seemed lost. He had just made a detour and couldn't find his destination, but he also took himself inside. The city in front of him now seemed very unfamiliar to him. He had never walked this way before, so he felt that he had no impression at all. Where do I come from? Where am I going? How does it look like each direction is not the direction when you came, and it seems like each direction is the direction when you came? Guillermo looked around in confusion at the unfamiliar environment, and finally shook his head, not too worried. He picked up his phone and started searching. Anyway, with such advanced technology nowadays, it's usually okay to just bring a phone when going out. Swipe a few times on his phone, probably because he usually doesn't use map navigation very much, and there are many software applications and various icons on his phone, making it difficult to find where the corresponding program is. Just as he was thinking about downloading a new one, his thumb sliding on the screen suddenly stopped. Is the software I downloaded before a bad navigation or something? Is it a revision now? Looking at the program option with a simple icon displaying map, Guillermo felt something was not quite right. He remained silent for a while before silently opening the program option. The map quickly showed up, and he swiped a few times to confirm his location and the fact that he didn't know the surrounding place names. Then he searched for the name of the restaurant again, but couldn't find it. It's not on the delivery software either, is it so low? Key. But I guess I missed today. Whether I can find it or not, even if I can find it in the future, I have been delaying for so long. They may have already closed. With a sigh, Guillermo searched for the location of his residence, looked at the route back, and couldn't help but furrow his brow slightly. Did he unconsciously come this far? It feels like it takes almost half an hour just to walk back. However, this was also a matter of helplessness. He picked the best route, turned on the navigation, turned around a few times, calibrated the direction, and then took another step. Returning with full of resentment and disappointment. A terrible day. About 10 minutes later. It seems to be getting more and more remote as we go. Guillermo walked on the long slope, muttering in confusion. He lowered his head to look at the map navigation on his phone, and then looked up at the surroundings. He saw the winding and spacious slope extending like a snake. Under the soft streetlights, the granite wall on the right appeared sturdy and thick, and the forest outside the slope was silent in the deep night. The green environment is quite good, and I really didn't know there was such a place here. But at this time, there is really a horror movie atmosphere, especially now that I am walking alone on this road. I don't know if it's an illusion, but Guillermo always felt that the air around his body was gradually decreasing, not only in terms of physical temperature, but also in terms of psychological coldness. Squinting his eyes slightly, he looked at the complex of buildings standing in front of the winding and undulating slope, then turned his gaze to the thick granite wall next to him, where a bronze plaque was embedded, seemingly a road sign, roughly indicating what was ahead. Miyagi Prefecture, Sujizawa, 3rd High School. Ha! I thought there was a park or scenic spot ahead, but actually it turned out to be a school. And I haven't heard of the name of this school. Guillermo carefully searched his memory and confirmed that he had no impression, and the style of the name was not quite right. After all, school names such as XX City Middle School, XX No. 1 Middle School, and XX No. 2 Middle School were the familiar formats he knew. The current Miyagi Sujizawa 3rd High School seems out of place, clearly not a seductive and cheap guy with a unique artistic style. What is Miyagi? What is Xianshanzai? Villages in cities or the brand name of a certain company? A series of questions flashed through his mind, and Guillermo confirmed his route again. It was indeed the shortest distance, basically taking a straight line, taking a shortcut through this campus on the way. Well, since the map shows it this way, that's right. He calmed down and continued to move forward. The coldness in the air lingers, and a faint pressure emanates from all around, as if something is watching in the dimness intertwined with the light of streetlights and the shadows of the night. Guillermo doesn't really like this feeling, but he's not a child anymore, naturally realizing that this is just his own psychological effect. However, a few minutes later, as he walked very close to the main building complex of the school ahead and happened to pass by the road in front of the school gate, he suddenly felt that the ground beneath his feet seemed to shake, and the epicenter came from the nearby school. Guillermo turned his head strangely towards the direction of the school and found that the entire teaching building was pitch black. What was the commotion just now? Is there any major maintenance or construction project in this high school recently? But it's already this time, there's no reason to say that the construction site is still working late at night. Can talismans be easily peeled off? No humans without curse power cannot achieve this. Generally speaking, it's like this. Under the darkness, 2 high school students were running wildly on the long winding slope. The one in front, dressed in black, was already gasping for breath, while the one behind looked fine and even had extra strength to ask questions that puzzled him. Take the right side and take a shortcut. The boy behind glanced at the road ahead and estimated how long it was before he arrived at school. As he was more familiar with the terrain, he made a decisive decision. The black-clad high school students in front naturally had nothing to oppose and quickly followed suit. The content this time is too powerful, and the seal is also aging, just as fragile as paper. But hearing you say, curses or something, I still can't imagine it. Both of them have excellent physical strength, quickly approaching their destination while exchanging intelligence and opinions. On the other side. It's all fake, it's all fake. Guillermo was muttering, forcing himself to calm down and face the scenes before him. In front of him, the originally solid ground seemed to have melted, transforming from a solid state of matter to a liquid state. In his eyes, the entire world became more twisted, comical and absurd. The roads were like rivers filled with black air, and the ground turned into a purple-black vortex-filled ocean. In this nightmare-like sea area, there are still a few peculiar things swimming, which cannot be seen clearly, but the displayed ID and health bar are clearly showing a sense of existence. 100%. 100%. 100%. And behind the blood bar, there is basically a skull pattern, with a bright red color that carries a bit of ominous meaning. In this chaotic vision, there are undoubtedly incarnations of nightmares, just like in a world as oppressive and suffocating as the deep sea, with no light, floating alone on the sea surface and huge shadows swimming beneath it. Well, in the face of such a sudden transition, when the whole world was suddenly overturned without warning, Guillermo's performance was calm, neither pale or too wars. Although it was not like Mount Taishan collapsing without changing his face, it was almost the same. He just looks at it that way. There's nothing to be afraid of anymore. After all, knowing that they are all fake and just delusional fantasies caused by their own mental problems, what is there to be afraid of? Moreover, I have already made up my mind to return to a normal world no matter what, and I cannot easily surrender. Boom. The strong sense of oppression brought about a tangible wind pressure, with a huge shadow leaping out of the water like a whale, shrouded in black air, huge in size like a small mountain, and grotesque in appearance, as if coming out of a nightmare. Immediately after, it was like a signal, and other huge shadows rushed out of the ground one after another. The huge protruding naked eyeballs, black tentacles waving haphazardly, dense insect arthropods, even fragments and limbs of the human body, as well as various messy biological tissues, are pieced together onto a bulky and putrid body, creating an image that can be extremely disgusting. And the flesh and blood are blurry, with blood dripping profusely, especially various sticky green and black mucus, constantly wriggling and flowing down, pulling into threads at the site of torn tissue fractures. These mucus are mixed with unknown tissue fragments, as well as unknown yellow and green paste, rolling in the open chrysanthemum-shaped mouthparts. Finally, accompanied by the swirling black air, it gushed out like a fountain. Perhaps due to psychological effects, there seems to be a phantom stench rushing towards us. Nima. Guemo, who had just remained calm, now had a big change in his face and turned around to run. He can indeed tolerate false fear, but he cannot accept such real disgust. Fighting is okay, but what does it mean to have a broom stained with feces? End of this chapter. Chapter 8 is all about foxes on the mountain. What are you telling me about Liaozhai? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 is all about foxes on the mountain. What are you telling me about Liaozhai? Guemo didn't even know if he was feeling scared, nauseous, or afraid of that kind of nausea. After all, this is really difficult to distinguish. Is it intuitive to feel scared, or is it simply because of nausea that one feels scared? Of course, he didn't want to discuss this meaningless issue either. Anyway, he absolutely didn't want to be touched by those things, even though he knew it was all his own mental hallucinations and fantasies. But just think about that disgusting chrysanthemum-shaped mouthpiece, all kinds of sticky liquid mucus. What a day. Akita dog. What if it's fake? After being so disgusting, he must be unable to eat for several days. I already had a frustrating day today. I couldn't find that restaurant and I'm not sure if it's my fault. I guess I'll have to go eat those ordinary and unappetizing foods later. If I can't eat anything for a few days, it's going to make him die. I finally know why most mental patients' condition is getting worse and worse. Guemo gritted his teeth and rushed forward, while the alien monsters behind him were fierce and relentless in pursuit. The roaring and roaring voices shook people's hearts, and the black air and a sense of substantial oppression radiated out. Chasing Guemo from behind made him feel his hair stand on end. Relatively speaking, I am still able to realize that this is actually a delusion, but I still feel such immense pressure. It can be imagined that those who suffer from severe illnesses, completely treat their brain repair as reality, and completely accept distorted worldviews are facing such terrible nightmares. For them, it's probably living in a completely shattered and distorted world, filled with real dangers. And because everything comes from their own inner thoughts and imagination, it is simply unavoidable, and naturally, under increasingly severe mental pressure, they will gradually drive themselves crazy. Can we say that we will also be like this in the future? Roar. The low roar behind him was within reach, and Guemo, whose thoughts were a bit divergent, instinctively turned around and glanced at him. He happened to see a large open blood basin mouth enveloping him, with chrysanthemum-shaped mouthparts wriggling, densely packed with sharp teeth and surging mucus inside gone. His face turned slightly green, so nauseous that his entire scalp was tingling. He had already reached the limit of his speed, and suddenly miraculously increased by a few points again. There seemed to be a brief shadow under his feet, causing him to suddenly move forward. It was just right to let the abyss behind me bite into the air. In front of him was a railing, and Guemo didn't turn back. His speed didn't decrease at all, and he accelerated his approach without thinking, then took off. He grabbed the top of the railing with both hands and flipped over with one force. Inside is the school, but at this moment, he can't bear to think too much. After all, there is no shelter or obstruction outside, and racing on spacious roads is definitely unavoidable. His feet landed steadily, and the slight impact was completely relieved by just bending his knees. He gasped for breath and then stepped out of his legs again. Fortunately, he found that his current physical fitness seemed to be very energetic, not feeling too tired, as if he could continue running for a while. Perhaps it's because of adrenaline secretion, he thought. It's like playing VR sensory games. When the received information is very realistic, it can already deceive the brain to some extent, causing the body to experience stress reactions. Behind him were still angry and eager low growls, followed closely by the evil-shaped monsters. Although they had just distanced themselves, they were rapidly approaching again. The breath of living people makes them greedy and violent, unable to calm down, eager to devour everything they can grab, roar. Suddenly, there were several fierce roars coming from ahead. Guo was already running and paying attention behind him, but when he noticed the movement, he instinctively looked forward. Immediately after, he was startled. Two fierce big dogs, one black and one white, flew out of nowhere, not particularly large in size. However, their fur seemed to be shrouded in a dense special effect, emitting energy-reflected light, and their momentum was extremely astonishing. Compared with those extremely vicious deformed monsters, they were no less impressive, even surpassing them. However, it seems that they are not in the same camp as those ferocious monsters, but in opposite positions. The two big dogs, like two lightning bolts of black and white, rushed straight past Gumo's side and rushed towards his back. With clear targets, they all collided with the monster group behind them. Like stone fire and spring thunder, the speed is so fast that it is almost invisible, which has surpassed the level that the normal human visual nerve's reaction ability can capture. Guo also couldn't see clearly what was happening, only to hear a series of tearing sounds, followed by black blood splattering everywhere. That group of deformed monsters flew with flesh and blood, their limbs torn apart and their bodies torn apart. Sleeping trough, where did the dog come from? Come here quickly. A low cry sounded ahead, and in shock, Guo turned around. He saw a high school student wearing a deep blue high-collar jacket and deep blue wide-leg pants, with a hedgehog head and short hair, on the road ahead. His expression was cold and urgent, waving at him repeatedly. Without any hesitation, Guo quickly approached over there. He had a lot of doubts, but at this moment, this was not too important. Even the disgusting monsters that followed came out. So, how big a deal could his own confused imagination create such an inexplicable person at this time? It's better to say that while Guo breathed a sigh of relief. At least not having to have intimate contact with those ghosts and gods now. He also became somewhat curious. He wants to see to what extent his out-of-control thinking will go crazy this time, and how his imagination will unfold. To be honest, this is a very peculiar idea, even giving him a strange feeling that his current mental split has become two distinct parts. After all, he believed that everything in front of him was a fictional scene created by his spiritual thinking, and at the same time, he was curious about what would happen next because he didn't know. This means that he subconsciously felt that a part of his consciousness no longer belonged to him, so he couldn't control his thoughts and thinking. Isn't this the source of division? What kind of person are you? Why are you here? The dark blue high school student with a cold and cool temperament quickly looked up and down at the person in front of him, and asked with a somewhat skeptical tone. The significance of the special level curse is significant, and this person is clearly not a student of this high school anymore. Suddenly appearing here at night cannot make him doubt it. Me. Guo blinked his eyes and spoke seriously. I just got hungry at night and came out to have supper. Inside and outside the words, there was a hint of me just coming out to make soy sauce. No problem, that's just one thing. Eating late-night snacks. The high school student's eyebrows suddenly raised high. This area belongs to this school, and although there are no villages or shops around, there are indeed no commercial streets. Then, this person said he came here to have a late-night snack. Can't we pass by here? Guo shrugged and spread his hand. Dot. Dot. The high school student frowned tightly, carefully discerning the expression on his face, always feeling that something was not quite right. Of course, it doesn't mean you can't come out for dinner at night, nor does it mean you can't pass by here, but if you come out at this time and choose to pass by here, it carries some suspicion. And most importantly, the other person appears to be an ordinary person without any magical power or aura, but where does this appear like an ordinary person? After escaping the danger, he quickly calmed down, moving at a speed that was clearly abnormal, and his expression seemed too calm, his tone too confident, and he didn't even blush or breathe. It's like being full of doubts from expression to action all over my body. Because one thing to know is that ordinary people generally cannot see spells, which often means that once they are caught up in such a special situation, they will be extremely shocked, fearful, and unable to accept it. After all, the worldview of the past has been shattered, rationality has been shaken to the brink of collapse, and the whole person is numb. But what about the person in front of me? Although he just turned around and ran away when facing the curse, I really couldn't see how scared and desperate he felt, because ordinary people were caught up in such a special situation. How could they show such a calm and heartfelt demeanor? No matter how rough the nerves are, they shouldn't be so outrageous. The only possible explanation is that this person is not facing a spell for the first time, so it is very likely that they are already a member of the spell world. In that case, if they insist on pretending to be ordinary people and appearing here at this time, is the suspicion not strong enough? At this moment, the movement on the other side has disappeared. But two fierce big dogs had already solved the problem decisively, tearing apart the few spells in less than 10 seconds. With his fist clenched slightly, the high school student turned his head towards the nearby teaching building and made a decisive decision. He spoke in a deep voice, "It's too dangerous here, you follow me." The special level curse object is still inside the building, and dragging it down may cause problems. He doesn't have time to argue with the other party here, and it's not realistic to ask them carefully. So, let's just be straightforward. Isn't this person supposed to pretend to be an ordinary person? Then he'll treat the other person as an ordinary person. Given the danger here, it's better to let the other person follow him. On the surface, it is to protect the other person, but in reality, it is possible to keep this person by your side and watch them at any time, to prevent any small actions from being done in places you cannot see. As for whether there is any danger, this idea flashed through my mind, and then I was passed by a high school student in black. Anyway, my teacher must be nearby. Oh, good. Guo nodded obediently. Whatever it was, he was already lying flat. Ah, no, he was already lying flat. However, Guo agreed so quickly, which stunned the high school students who were staring at him with sharp eyes. The latter originally thought that the other side would find various excuses to evade, but the result was so refreshing that he couldn't handle it. After a brief moment of silence, he gritted his teeth and quickly turned around to run towards the teaching building over there. Follow me. Guo followed closely behind and found it a bit difficult. The opponent's speed was indeed a bit fast, but the teaching building was not far and the distance to run was not too long, so there was no pressure. He hung tightly behind the other person, scrutinizing the mysterious cold-faced teenager while curiously asking. Speaking of which, what's your name, little brother? Fu Heiwei. The cold-faced boy fell silent for a moment before replying. Fu. This surname is a bit rare. Guo watched as the font on the cold-faced boy's head changed from a question mark to a more specific display, Fu Heiwei, 97%. He tugged at the corner of his mouth, trying to recall whether he had been exposed to any relevant information in this area during this period. It is said that, one has thoughts day and dreams night, and there is also a saying that, one cannot imagine things they have not seen before. Simply put, it exposes the essence of human imagination and also shows that imagination requires logic, whether it is a mental outburst, divergent thinking, or seemingly inexplicable dreaming. In fact, it is often because before this, one has been exposed to relevant information and unconsciously left a certain impression deep in their consciousness. Just couldn't remember for a while, Guemo thought for a moment and then asked, what were those things just now? It's the first time I've seen such things. ... At this moment, I just remembered to pretend to know nothing. Was it a bit late? And this acting skills are a bit clumsy. Fu Heihui cursed inwardly, pretending to be an ordinary person who had seen strange things for the first time, even though she was completely calm. After taking a deep breath of effort, he said in a deep voice, "These are curses, creatures that come together from the curse power emitted by ordinary people. You can see them as curses made up of negative emotions overflowing from humans." End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Is like when people who are not on the same channel each have their own. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 is like when people who are not on the same channel are all brainstorming spells. It seems to be an unheard of setting. Have you been exposed to this information recently? Guemo pondered carefully for a moment, but still didn't have much clue. He hasn't been following movies or watching dramas for a long time. The games he has been playing recently mainly focus on the main theme of love and peace, with humanitarian brilliance shining on him, such as The Stars and The King of Crusaders. In summary, he has not been exposed to this type of information recently, so it is a bit difficult to understand why such a setting is popping up now. As his thoughts spun, Fu Heihui, who was running ahead, quickly rushed into the teaching building. He took a moment to pay attention to the suspicious guy behind him, not letting his guard down. At the same time, he quickly locked in the position inside the building with the strongest curse aura and the strongest negative fluctuations, following the curse force sensing. That's right, as the core of the curse vortex, it must be the location of the super curse object. However, just as Fu Heihui was about to rush upstairs in one breath, he noticed that the person behind him suddenly slowed down suspiciously and did not enter outside the gate. This also made him feel a chill in his heart. Without thinking, he stopped the car and turned around and whispered, "What are you doing? Come over." ... Okay. Guemo shook his head and withdrew his gaze from the other side. Without saying much, he followed the young man ahead. He was actually daydreaming and looking around just now, but his gaze happened to pass by. Although it was dark under the night and he couldn't see anything clearly, there was a bright sign displayed over there, appearing in his field of vision, 100%. Guemo couldn't be sure if it was also a monster he had imagined. Subconsciously, he wanted to see more clearly, but he had just slowed down a bit and was immediately noticed by the young man in front of him, Fu, and stopped drinking decisively. Well, it seems like this is not the right time to do it now. After all, what can I do if I see it clearly? Isn't it disgusting to me? At this moment, Guemo decisively dispelled his curious thoughts, withdrew his gaze and stopped paying attention. He hesitated for a moment before following the young man in front into the building. The reason why he hesitated is because he thought of one thing, which was that he had decided to be a normal person. Now, suddenly breaking into school at night, isn't it not good? Once discovered, it's probably impossible to argue. After a little hesitation and serious contemplation of the disgusting monster images he had imagined, Guemo made a decisive choice. It was too disgusting to stay and face those things. Obviously it was even more unbearable. This person has a problem. At the same time, on a high slope outside the school, a figure stood at the top of a tree under the cover of night, taking a panoramic view of the situation inside and outside the campus. He was at least 1.9 meters tall, had striking white hair, and wore a black eye mask at night. After observing for a moment, he gently raised his eyebrows as he met the passerby who was following his student from afar across the air for a moment. That's right, indeed, at such a distance, the other person cast their gaze towards him from afar. The calm and indifferent gaze undoubtedly locked in his position. It was definitely not unintentional, but truly discovered his existence. Oh, it's interesting, even I looked at it. The man suddenly showed a very interested expression. Where did this monster come from? How could it be so leisurely to play the game of pretending to be a pig and eating a tiger with the younger generation? Although my student is good and has great potential that is worth looking forward to, I still can't handle it alone. Shouldn't this monster be interested? Well, so you're really here for a special level curse, right? He made such a reasonable speculation while frowning. He had originally thought that this task would be just like that. If nothing unexpected happened, his students could handle it on their own, and he could secretly fish and take the opportunity to buy a late-night snack. But now it seems that this cannot be done. It's not surprising that this man has such a misunderstanding. His strength goes without saying, coupled with his innate 6 eyes, which can see through the opponent's spells and directly track or predict the trajectory of the spell power. As for directly distinguishing whether the target object is a spell master, it is not just an easy task to achieve. However, at this moment, it is rare to overlook. No matter how you look at it, the person across from you is just an ordinary passerby without any magical aura, just like an ordinary human who has never possessed any magical power. Not to mention Fu Heihui, inexperienced student who has just started out, even he just had this view. Unfortunately, it was this ordinary person who, from a long distance, caught a glimpse of him secretly observing outside the school. Let's put it this way, he didn't notice the other person, but the other person noticed him. Regardless of whether there was any carelessness or not, it can at least indicate that the person on the other side is definitely not simple, not as it appears on the surface, but a mysterious powerhouse. Well, it's hard to even say if it's human. On the other side, Gu Mo was not aware that just because he saw a blood bar from a distance, a series of doubts suddenly appeared on his body, and he had even been expelled from human status. Otherwise, he would definitely feel that it is far from the truth, and no one would casually dismiss someone else's status. He is now completely focused on the dangerous battle scene in front of him, with a young man named Fu Heihui leading him straight towards a clear goal. Which floor is it? 3 or 4 floors? He couldn't figure it out either. After all, he didn't count much when he rushed up with his head down. Anyway, this is not important. What's important is that this young man Fu rushed up all the way and accurately found the crime scene. A terrifying curse erupted, and the vortex of curse power almost engulfed the entire school building, with the center located on this floor. The release of the special curse, Fingers of Two-Faced Noah, was as pungent as the fresh smell of blood escaping from the sea. Sharks in the nearby waters naturally rushed towards them upon smelling the smell. Damn it! Are you still late? Firmly clenching her fists, Fu Heihui stared intently at what was happening ahead. On the dim corridor ahead, dense clumps of flesh wriggled and disgusting tentacles waved and squeezed against each other, but there were multiple different deformed monsters. Should we say they were spells? In short, multiple different monsters crowded along this section of the corridor, their huge swollen and disgusting bodies entwined together, and the ground was covered in various limbs and broken arms, extremely bloody, with flesh and blood flying everywhere. It seems that the monsters have already gone through a series of struggles and battles with each other, causing each other devastating injuries, ultimately creating such a stalemate. At this moment, as if they were about to merge into a new fusion, their excessively swollen and massive bodies were constantly squeezing in the hallway, interweaving into a disgusting and ferocious flesh ball. Originally, the space in the hallway was relatively spacious, but now being squeezed by them, they have no place to stand. At the center of the interwoven and wriggling flesh ball, there was a faint figure of a girl who seemed to have lost consciousness, unsure whether she had been hurt or frightened unconscious due to excessive mental impact. Amidst the squeezing of the flesh, the hands of dead gray individuals and the juicy tentacles wriggling together, the girl's figure was pulled and engulfed in the flesh, gradually being swallowed up. This. Gu Mo's corners of his eyes twitched wildly. Although he didn't want to admit it, this scene was a bit familiar and immediate. Is this really something he can watch for free? Is it true that the information and settings that one has an impression of are actually this? What a joke. He has been doing good deeds and accumulating virtue throughout his life, never considering the quality of such things. Damn it. They want to devour people and curses together. Tightly clenching his fists, Fu Heihui's heart was burning with anxiety, but under his restlessness, he was unable to make a decisive choice. His experience was ultimately too shallow, not enough for him to show his decisive or ruthless determination at such times. The so-called throwing the mouse as a taboo tool means that he wants to take action but is afraid of accidentally injuring the unconscious girl. However, reason also tells him that if he doesn't do anything, not only can he not save innocent passers-by, but he can only watch top-level curses being swallowed by these things, gaining exceptionally strong curse power, and becoming even more difficult to deal with. Bang! Fortunately, this dilemma did not last too long, or rather, it was a brief moment. Suddenly, the window next to the corridor shattered, and an agile figure rushed in with a heroic posture, not knowing how it climbed up this level. Tiger staff. Fu Heihui was surprised. Didn't she let the other party wait outside? Why did she rush in now? However, the effect was quite good, after all, even he didn't think of this incident. Those curses who saw him as the main threat and focused their attention on him naturally couldn't react more. In a situation where both parties were caught off guard, the hero who risked his life suddenly appeared to the extreme fierce and overbearing. He crashed into the monster swarm. This sudden figure did not use spells, but rather relied on the physical strength of a wild bull, punching and kicking, forcefully pulling away the entangled monsters or shock-aging them for a distance. Then, seizing a brief moment, he grabbed the girl's arm and rushed out before the monsters could react. The whole process was extremely thrilling, with even a slight mistake requiring the involvement of one more person. Fu Heihui instinctively held her breath until she saw the boy rushing in and safely rescued the girl from the danger zone, and finally breathed a long sigh of relief. At the same time, he couldn't help but glance and pay attention to another person next to him. That person had a completely absent-minded expression on his face, standing beside him, completely ignoring the chaotic scene around him. His eyes were still unconsciously staring in the direction of the broken window, their eyes empty, and no matter how they looked, they seemed to be wandering. Fu Heihui suddenly clenched her fists, deceiving ghosts. Such behavior could not have been ordinary people. Ordinary people are so scared when they encounter such a situation, their faces turn pale, and they almost want to leave first in a battle. It's hard to justify a performance like this, which is absent-minded, careless, and even lazy, to take a glance at the thrilling and explosive scenes that should attract attention the most. Gu Mo was unaware that he was being slandered by Fu Heihui at this time, and the other party's doubts and anxiety about him became increasingly intense. He just pressed his hand against his chin, tilted his head, and stared at the shattered window in the side corridor, his expression visibly lost in thought. Should be fake. Actually, this window must not have broken, it must be like this. That's right, in this tense and thrilling moment, no matter how it looks, his mind is filled with inexplicable thoughts, concerned about the broken window. After all, he was just thinking about not making too much noise, which was a bit difficult for him to accept. It's like a lightning flash, or like a fast sword slashing through it. The arc trajectory in the air whizzes a few times, leaving a brief residue on the human retina. With the sound of tearing, the spells in the hallway are almost powerless to resist and are torn apart. A pair of black and white spirit dogs fiercely rushed forward, dividing them and devouring them, swallowing them whole. Blood and flesh flew everywhere, and the scene appeared unusually bloody. Fortunately, it was ultimately a spiritual body, and the texture and characteristics of blood and flesh were only simulated special effects. With the rapid loss of curse power, the fragmented limbs quickly lost their assigned properties and evaporated into the air. Although I wanted to ask why you still came, you did a great job. Offering spells, commanding spirits, and seizing the opportunity to defeat the curse, Fu Heihui quickly stepped forward and spoke to a high school boy named Hu Zhang, with a hint of urgency in his tone. At the same time, he couldn't help but turn back and guard against Gu Mo behind him. Now. Look at how the curse works. The curse. Is this? The boy, who had a slight sigh of relief, checked the condition of the girl in his arms and quickly looked for it. He found a strange thing being held tightly by the unconscious woman. That was a withered finger, which looked like a human finger at first glance, but upon closer inspection, one would notice subtle differences. The overly sharp nails and slightly strange lines gave off a creepy and eerie feeling. That's right, it's it. The 2 fingers of Su Noa on both sides, give them to me quickly. This thing is very dangerous. Fu Heihue nodded repeatedly and reached out his hand to the tiger cane. What's the use of this thing? The boy looked at the cursed object in his hand, and those resentful spirits just now were for this. Don't say so much for now, give it to me quickly. Fu Heihue took a few steps forward, her tone somewhat urgent. At this time, it's not the time to explain. On both sides of the night. Not far away, Gu Mo's heart suddenly moved. In a game he had recently played, during the Warring States period when ghosts and monsters were rampant, he used his own pinched wife. Cough cough, the beautiful young lady she pinched killed various thieves and monsters, and it seems that there is this element inside. Is it because of such content information? Can you make me healthy? I'm a bit curious too. Gu Mo thought this way and spoke lightly, while walking over with a look of wanting to join the fun. However, Fu Heihue, who had just received the top-level curse from the Tiger Wand, had been on his guard all along. As soon as he noticed Gu Mo's movements, he turned around and issued a warning with a face as if facing a formidable enemy. Don't come over. Don't get any closer. He knew that this person really had ulterior motives and came for a special level curse. Gu Mo paused for a moment, stopped, and a question mark slowly floated over his head. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. None of you can leave. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. None of you can leave. What's going on? Did you just do something? Why did you suddenly turn your face and not recognize anyone? In a dead silence and stalemate, Gu Mo felt confused and completely unaware of what had happened. After several seconds, he felt it was necessary to do something to break the silence, and could only maintain a polite yet awkward smile on his face. At the same time, he tilted his head. Sorry, what you're saying? I'm a bit confused. However, under preconceived misunderstandings, regardless of his original intention, every word and action in this situation is always particularly easy to be interpreted excessively. Of course, it's in the wrong direction. Just like now, looking at the person across from him, his expression suddenly became stiff, and his smile suddenly became indifferent. Fu Heihue confirmed her thoughts even more, and it was indeed like this. After seeing the top-level curse, the other party immediately prepared to take action. And after being discovered by oneself, I immediately prepared to turn my back. And looking at Gu Mo's stiff expression across from him, as well as his crooked head that seemed to smile rather than smile, he swallowed a mouthful of water and for some reason suddenly felt immense pressure, with a faint sweat rising from his forehead. Although he doesn't have the strength, vision, and experience of a teacher, he still has the basic logic. The person in front of him may seem like an ordinary person, but in reality, he is definitely not an ordinary person. It should be because he can't see through the other person that he can draw the wrong conclusion. So the other party's strength is undoubtedly much stronger than their own. If such an enemy were to face a challenge, Fu Heihue didn't have much confidence to stop him, especially since there were 3 dragging oil bottles behind him, 2 of which were unconscious. There was no chance of winning in a fair single fight, so how could one dragging 3 be successful? It seems that the only way is to support as much as possible for a while and wait for your teacher to come over. Why didn't you speak? Unable to receive an answer, Gu Mo felt even more embarrassed, especially being stared at by this high school student with a gaze that looked at class enemies, which put a lot of pressure on him. On the other hand, what kind of unfolding was this? Is this a strange delusion of discovering that he is the big boss in the end? Fu Heihue remained silent, but after being mocked by the mysterious person across from him with a cold and sarcastic remark, he still felt his nervousness rise again, and the cold sweat on his forehead gradually increased. Are you coming? Hey, what's going on? You. Don't you know each other? The high school boy behind him also sensed the sinister atmosphere. He stood up holding the girl in his arms and asked urgently and anxiously, trying to stop a terrible conflict that was about to happen. He didn't know who the person across from him was. He thought he was with Fu Heihue, so he didn't ask much earlier. But now it seems that they are completely two people belonging to the opposing camp. Tiger staff, take them out of here quickly. Fu Heihue did not turn back or explain. His muscles and nerves were completely tense, and he was in a state of imminent danger. Hurry up. Leave now. You can't help staying here. Damn it. What are you going to do? The boy named Huzhang gritted his teeth, knowing that what the other person was saying was true. He could only play a role as a drag in this situation, staying behind would only help, and there were also two unconscious friends who needed to be taken away. However, he was also worried about Fu Heihue. Judging from the current situation, it was very obvious that the person across from him was very scary, and Fu Heihue was not a match. You go first. I'll follow you later. Fu Heihue gritted his teeth tightly. He knew that Huzhang was worried, but at this moment, he should be more decisive, otherwise he might not be able to run later. I said, have you finished speaking? Guemo was originally patiently listening, but at this moment, he couldn't help but interrupt their conversation. Because he felt that the current situation was inexplicably familiar, that is, when he used to watch TV dramas, there would always be a classic pull, so he could not help roast. You're wasting so much time, I'm afraid none of you can leave. Do you think this is a transformation of a magical girl? In their own exclusive close-up time, the enemy will only watch and not launch an attack. Of course, it's just roast. He can't do anything. However, coincidentally, just as Gumo's words fell, the corridor ceiling above Fu Heihue's head seemed to melt suddenly, and a huge curse vortex appeared. With heavy shadows and great pressure, the huge ferocious body fell from above in an instant with the momentum of towering mountains. Be careful. The tiger cane behind could see clearly, and the pupils suddenly contracted to the size of a needle tip. In an instant, the roar was already broken. But there was still no time, especially when he instinctively focused all his attention on Guemo. Just now, Fu Heihue, who was inevitably distracted by talking to the tiger stick behind him, naturally slowed down his reaction. When he lifted his head, the terrifying scene reflected in his eyes was already within reach. There is no retreat, no avoidance. Boom. Amidst the loud noise, it seemed as if the entire building was shaking, with smoke and dust rising everywhere, and fragments flying wildly. Subconsciously, Guemo raised his hand to block in front of him. After the smoke and dust dispersed, he fixed his gaze and was momentarily stunned because the corridor ahead was now empty, with only various broken bricks and concrete debris splattering all over the ground. And Fu Heihue's figure had already disappeared from the corridor, along with the monster that had just launched a surprise attack and descended from the sky. There were no figures of either in the corridor. On the other hand, there was a huge hole in the entire wall from the previously broken window, as if it had been blasted open by explosives. Even the ground on the side collapsed, shattering a large part, giving it a shocking feeling. Moonlight splashed in from outside the hole. It doesn't need to be explained at all, it can make people understand at a glance where the disappeared high school boy and the monster that fell from the sky went. The terrifying force smashed through the wall and rushed out. As for the other boy, he was suddenly pushed out by the impact and landed at the other end of the corridor. The boy named Tiger Stick struggled to stand up from the ground and struggled to get up, feeling pain all over his body. He instinctively glanced at his two friends who were still unconscious, and then looked up at the opposite side of the corridor. I saw that the corridor was almost cut in two from the middle, and the cold moonlight poured in from the broken hole next to it, like a curtain separating two worlds. On one side was the disheveled self, and on the other side was the mysterious young man, still standing there, dangerous and deadly, with a hint of cruel ridicule in his carelessness, as if what he had just done was just pulling out the weeds on the roadside. In fact, at this moment, Guillermo was also a bit unresponsive and just stood there in a daze. However, under the preconceived misunderstanding, his brain was becoming more and more delicate. The boy named Huzhang couldn't help but clench his fist tightly, his angry eyes seeming to spew flames, and he stared at Guillermo intently. Damn it. It's so despicable. Wait. Despicable. Are you talking about yourself? Guillermo blinked his eyes and came back to his senses. He felt that this unfolding was becoming increasingly bizarre. Although he had not done anything, what did the other party think? Shouldn't you think that the monster just now was all manipulated by yourself? Hey, can you guys have some logic? Isn't it obvious that so many monsters were fighting for that finger just now? It must have been because the finger was on Brother Fu's body that the thing was aimed at him. Do we still need someone else to manipulate it? Well, Guillermo also felt a bit disorganized. In fact, from just now on, or rather, when he heard the term, fingers of the two sides of the Noah, and wanted to get closer and take a look, he immediately didn't know which sensitive nerve Fu Heihue had touched and was treated like a formidable enemy by the other party. He had completely lost track of the next developments. Roar. At this moment, excited howls and low growls came from outside, like the excited sound of beasts hunting for food. Oh no. The boy named Huzhang's face suddenly changed, but his body reacted faster than his brain and rushed out to the huge hole. Looking out, he saw various sharp fragments scattered on the concrete road below, a wolf-like mess. Fu Heihue was covered in bruises, lying on the ground with his face almost covered in flowing blood. His eyebrows were constantly twitching, whether it was due to pain or fear. A terrifying shadow enveloped him, and the monstrous creature resembling a small mountain resembled a malformed terrestrial whale with ape-like arms. At this moment it was also reaching out with a long arm, grabbing him and opening its bloody mouth, as if preparing to swallow him along with the curse on its body. Ah, drink! Amidst the roar, the agile figure appeared without warning, taking advantage of its superior position and jumping down from the hole above. With the combined effect of gravity and inertia, it fiercely punched the huge vengeful spirit's forehead. Tiger Wan didn't think much, nor did he have time to think, because the situation was too critical. He was worried that if he delayed for just one more second, he would watch helplessly as Fu Heihue was swallowed. The punch that fell from the sky was not very effective, probably only causing a small amount of white damage, but also causing his own arm to ache and his tiger's mouth to crack and bleed. However, it successfully disturbed the huge vengeful spirit, roaring angrily, turning the direction and wanting to slap the fly to death. Damn it! Fu Heihue took this opportunity to try his best to prop himself up, but still felt that his body was not at his disposal. The impact just now was too severe, even the wall was pierced, causing him to be thrown out and fall heavily to the ground. No matter how strong his physique was, it was difficult for him to withstand such an impact. If it were an ordinary person without any special powers, he would probably have already died by this time, and his situation could not be considered very good either. His ears temporarily became deaf due to severe concussion, his eyes became blurred due to congestion, and his head almost lost consciousness due to severe concussion. He didn't even know how many bones he had broken or if his organs had shifted. However, even for injuries that urgently needed to be sent to the hospital for rescue, he still didn't consider it at all and struggled to stand up again, while speaking angrily. Tiger Cane. Shouldn't you take your friend out of here now? But what do? The tiger stick tightly hugged the long arm, refusing to let go no matter how the resentful spirit waved it. The whole person was thrown back and forth in mid-air, like a grasshopper on a rope. At the next moment, the huge vengeful spirit angrily slapped the long grey arm of the deceased towards the nearby high platform, along with the boy holding onto it tightly. Bang! With a muffled sound, there seemed to be some cracks on the surface of the high platform, and debris flew everywhere. The tiger staff was almost spitting blood from the impact of this solid blow, and it also flew out of hand. Curses can only be eliminated with curses, you cannot defeat them. Fu Heihui gritted her teeth tightly, the situation was too bad, and her own teacher did not show up. I don't know if she went to have a late night or something on the way. Is she going to die here today? This resentful spirit is no longer something that one can deal with in their current state, not to mention the mastermind behind the manipulation of this vengeful spirit. I'm afraid they haven't taken it seriously yet. Subconsciously turning her head to look at the building on the side, Fu Heihui saw the figure naturally appearing in the large hole that had been blasted open on the shattered floor, bathed in moonlight, gazing down at the place below. At this moment, a hint of surprise finally appeared in her eyes. However, this actually made Fu Heihui feel extremely angry. If she had remained calm and composed, it would have been okay. The surprise she showed at this moment was actually a kind of humiliation. Because it made him feel like the other person was sitting in the upper audience of the ancient Roman Colosseum, and at this moment it was just because he enjoyed the ugly and desperate behavior of the people below, and felt stimulated. At this point, he naturally had no more doubts or confusion. The other party could not be an ordinary person, and he naturally believed that everything at present was likely caused by the other party. TSK, this is a bit outrageous. Isn't it that exaggerated? Of course, Guemo didn't know that the blame he was carrying was getting bigger and darker. He just looked at the scenes below and felt dizzy, almost unable to see them. This special effect was not to mention, and the feeling of being there was really real. However, there is one thing that is not good, which is indeed too exaggerated. After all, a person's physical fitness is not so good. Brother Fu, who crashed through a wall from such a high place and fell down, surprisingly had the strength to speak and shouted so arrogantly. There was also the little brother named Tiger Staff, who was pulled firmly onto the high platform by his huge tentacles, and it really hurt to look at him. But even so, surprisingly, it can still be as fierce as a tiger. Guemo felt that this was too outrageous. End of this chapter.